Tara Berghead and Seth Day from Tri-County Tech about how to make Halloween snacks. If you haven't seen it yet, you can watch it at your convenience on the library's Facebook page. We are now going to discuss some things you need to know about interviewing for a job. We are thrilled that Laura Sanders is here to share her knowledge and experience with you. Laura is the Human Resources, or HR Director, for the City of Bartlesville. She has worked in the HR department for the city for 5 years and has 10 years cumulative experience in HR. She completed her bachelor's degree in Organizational Management and Leadership from Friends University in 2009 and went on to complete her master's degree in Business Administration in 2014. Her passion for helping people led her to choose human resources as her profession. Ladies and gentlemen, Laura Sanders.
Thank you. So I first want to thank you guys for letting me share with you. Hopefully I can share some skills with you, and if not, maybe it's a refresher for you. So there's only a couple of us in here. We're properly distanced, so I'm going to go ahead and pull my mask off so that you can see what I'm saying. But I thought I would start by explaining what human resources role is, because I know when I was younger, I thought I had an idea of what human resources did, but I really wasn't sure until I really got into it. So the role for human resources is I think the biggest role is the employee advocate. So when employees have questions, when employees have concerns, whether it's something that's happening at work or sometimes outside of work, they come to HR for those concerns. And I think that's our biggest role, is supporting that employee and helping them with whatever their need is. And then, of course, we do all of the onboarding for new hires. So as an employee is going through that new hire process, so there's that pre-employment process, and maybe it consists of a background check or a physical or drug screen or whatever that position might require. HR will walk them through that process, and they'll do the contingency offers and then the official offers, and then we make them an official employee by filling out the proper paperwork with them and helping them get enrolled in their benefits, which segues into the next thing that HR does, is they help employees with their benefits. So we do all of the open enrollment and help employees get enrolled in all of their elections for that year. And if an employee needs to change their benefits, they come to HR for that support. Another thing that HR does is we create, maintain, and interpret policy. So if we see a need within the organization to create a policy, or if laws change or regulations change, then we will have to either update our policies or create a new policy for that. And then if employees or leaders have questions on what the intent of that policy is, then HR will walk them through that process and try to interpret that policy for them. And then, of course, the part that's not so fun is sometimes if there's discipline or even the termination process, which I use the term termination, but that could mean resignation, that could mean retirement. An employee is separating from the organization. HR helps with that process. And so that kind of in a nutshell is what human resources does. So now that you kind of have some background in that, I'll go into job applications. And I've got some pre-application pointers that I always like to give individuals. And the first one is clean up your social media. Sometimes that is the first thing that an employer will do. Not always, but sometimes, is they'll pull you up on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, TikTok, whatever platform you use. They'll pull you up and they'll see what you've posted or what you've shared. And sometimes if you're posting things that are negative or representing yourself in a negative way, that may, employers may take that into consideration when they're hiring individuals. So you always want to make sure that you're presenting yourself in a positive light when you're posting on social media, and then lock it down. Set it to private, so people that aren't friends with you or not connected to you cannot see everything that you're posting or sharing. And then the next advice that I always give to individuals is make sure that you have good, strong references. So I would recommend having at least 3, and make sure that they're aware that they're a reference for you, because we've had individuals that thought that somebody was going to say something positive about them and it wasn't positive. And so you want to make sure that who you're listing as your references are going to say something positive about you, and always make sure that you have 3 ready to go. And before you go to apply for a position, I would always recommend that you call that individual and let him know that you're applying for a position wherever it may be, and let them know that you're using them as a reference. That'll do one of 2 things. It'll clue them in that they're a reference for you and they can be expecting a call, but it'll also let you know if that number is still good for them, because anytime you're listing somebody's contact information, you want to make sure that it's good information. And always have those conversations prior to listing them. So now that you've done that, you're ready to apply for your job. And the biggest thing in applying for the job is making sure that you sell yourself. You want to get to that next step, which is the interview. And in order to get to that interview, you really have to sell yourself on this application. And make yourself marketable, whether it's on your application, your cover letter, your resume, whatever it is. Make sure that you represent yourself well on it. Read all the directions thoroughly. Make sure that you're answering all of the questions. Never leave a spot blank. So if it doesn't apply to you, put not applicable or NA. So you're not leaving something unchecked or unmarked or unfilled out. And don't be lazy. Don't take the easy route. We've had individuals that will apply for jobs with the city and they'll make a copy of the application because they're applying for more than one position. And you should always make sure that that application is tailored for the position that you're applying for. Make sure that your work history and your skills and your certifications are all relevant to that position. If you've got a special skill in the area that you're applying in, make sure that that's listed and highlighted, because there's times where even for our most popular positions, we'll have over 100 applicants. And so if you're one of 100, you want to make sure that you're selling yourself well enough to get that interview. And make sure that you're filling out your application legibly. Make sure that it's not, it doesn't have a bunch of scratches on it, or that there's not a lot of whiteout on it. Make sure that you're filling it out and you're taking your time to properly fill it out, because sometimes there's, when a hiring manager is looking at applications, they're looking at the effort that you put in to fill out that application. So if you filled it out very sloppily, they may think, okay, is this going to be an employee that doesn't give me full effort, or that doesn't take the initiative to learn the job and to do the job? So there's a lot of things that are looked into when you're looking at an application and how it's filled out. Always be truthful. We've had individuals that aren't always truthful on their application, and that is a reason to rescind an offer. So we found out through the background process, or somewhere through the process after they've applied, that they were maybe untruthful or omitted something on their application or resume. And it's so important to be truthful, because that can make a difference in whether or not you get a job or not. And highlight your personal skills that are needed for the job. Like I said, tailor that application to the position that you're applying for. Make sure that if you have special skills in that area, that you're properly highlighting them, and that you're not missing certain skills that maybe you excel at. And sometimes it requires more than just the application to do that. Sometimes we have to do a resume and a cover letter, because that once again shows the employer that you're putting in the extra effort, that you're not just filling out what's expected and doing the bare minimum to submit it. You're actually taking the time to complete a resume, and that you're taking the time to highlight your strengths, so that you can really sell yourself for that position. And double and triple check before submitting. It's so important that you don't submit it with that has grammatical errors or spelling errors. You want to make sure that the information that you're giving is correct. And so I would always encourage people to have somebody else review that. So sometimes just having a second set of eyes on it, where they can maybe catch something that you didn't catch because you've been looking at it for so long. And so, and the last thing that I do want to point out is it's okay to call and check up on the application. We have a lot of people that do that, and it's good, because it shows that you're really interested. And I think that there's a genuine interest when people do call because they're checking up on the status or seeing where it's at in the process. And I think it's okay to do that, but sometimes there's a fine line because you also don't want to hound them or call too much. And so it's okay to check, but just don't over check. And that's all I've got on the job application. Was there any questions that we have? Yes.
Yes, I have a question. What if you've never had a job before and you're applying for the first time? You're asking for work experience and you don't have any.
So, and that will happen. That happens. And so I would encourage people that don't have any work history to go get an internship or ask to volunteer, because then you can actually list on there that you volunteered or that you have worked to acquire some of those skills, because I think that will make an employer take a second look at you than if you just don't put anything out there. It's also important that maybe you go get those certifications or work on an education towards whatever it is that you're applying for. That way, if you don't have a lot of work history there, you at least have some education or certifications to back up some of that.
What about if I have it where I have been working and then I stopped working, but I don't have anything to show on my work history? I wasn't going to school at the time, I didn't have a job at the time, it's been 6 months, and then how do I handle that on my gaps? So gaps
in employment, that is something that you do want to expect to have to address, because and it happens sometimes, whether you get laid off or life happens sometimes, and you will have maybe a gap in your employment. And I think you just have to be able to explain what happened or what the circumstances were, because that is something that employers will typically ask maybe during the interview process, is what happened here, what was going on here. So
yeah, what if I have it where I had one job working and had retail in a store, and then I get another job and I'm working more in a restaurant? How do I go about showing that I could do that job at the restaurant even though I worked at retail before?
Okay, so your work history is different than what you're applying for, looking to get into. I think it's important to show some of there's some skills that you acquire at positions that you can take anywhere. So there's communication skills. You can use that in any profession. Your people skills, or your verbal and written skills that you may acquire at this position, even though this position is very different than the next one. Those skills, I think, will benefit you in any position that you have. So I would definitely highlight those on your resume or application as you apply for other positions.
What if I have it where I've already scheduled a vacation with my family and I finally get the job interview? Should I tell them that I'm going to be leaving for 2 weeks, or during the interview?
I think that's important to bring up. That way the employer's prepared for it, and maybe there's certain policies in place that don't allow for time off, during the first 6 months of employment or something like that. So it's not a disqualifier necessarily, but then you can at least plan for it ahead of time, or the employer knows to plan for it ahead of time. So I think it is worth mentioning to the employer during the interview process, or maybe during the contingency offer or something like that. Yeah. Okay, so if that's all the questions, we'll go ahead and start in on interviewing one-on-one. So I always tell people mock interviews are awesome. If you know somebody that's in a leadership position that can interview you and give you feedback, that is a really valuable resource or tool that you can use. So I encourage people to do that. And constructive criticism is okay. Sometimes we get our feelings hurt really easily, but you can't get your feelings hurt when you go into these mock interviews, because you want people to be truthful with you and tell you how you can better yourself. That way, when you go into the real interview, you're prepared. And so there's plenty of professionals out there or leaders out there that would be willing to do those mock interviews with you. All you have to do is ask. And so first impressions are everything. That means what you wear to the interview. That means how you look, have you rolled out of bed and your hair's sticking up all over the place. That's a first impression. So if they see you come in and you can't be bothered to brush your hair for your first day of work, then they may be concerned on the type of employee you may be once you start working. And so it's critical that you present yourself well during that interview. And I don't think that you can really be overdressed for an interview unless you're just wearing a ball gown and a tux or something. Maybe you're overdressed, but I think to wear business attire to a interview is, I think that's important to do. And pre-COVID, we would have said, make sure that you shake their hand, but now that's kind of frowned upon. So I think it's okay to not shake their hand, but you want to make eye contact and you want to be friendly. And we see so often that people get very, very nervous before an interview. And I think some of the things that we can do to avoid being so nervous is to make sure we know the company that we're applying to. So do your research beforehand. Make sure you know the organization. Make sure you know the job description that you're applying for. And sometimes we get so nervous because there's that fear of the unknown, and we don't know who we're interviewing with, and we don't know what we don't know. And so the more that you can educate yourself before this interview, the better you'll be with your nerves. And so just like they're interviewing you, you are interviewing them as well. And having that mindset may also help to lessen those nerves a little bit. So make sure if you know that you're applying for a certain position and the leader of that position, you know who it is, maybe you can look them up on Facebook. Use social media to look them up so you're familiar with who you're interviewing with. And so it's maybe not as uncomfortable when you go into that interview. And always make sure that you review your resume beforehand. We've seen where other people will submit a resume or submit an application for somebody, and then that individual doesn't even know what's been submitted. And so you want to make sure that you know your information and know what you've submitted. That way, when they pull your application up to start asking questions in regard to it, that you can answer those questions. And let's see. There's standard questions that are asked in almost every interview there, and some of them are very cliche questions, and I usually try to steer clear of some of the cliche questions. I know some of them are, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And so you're not going to be asked that every time, but sometimes you are. And so it's okay to know what you're going to say for those questions if you're asked. That way you're prepared for some of those questions anyways. And then the opener question is typically, tell me a little bit about yourself. That is usually one of the first questions that's asked. And it's usually a twofold question for employers. They obviously want the answer to it and want to know a little bit about you, but they also can use that question as an icebreaker. So talk about work history, talk about experience. It's okay to talk about your hobbies, because when you talk about hobbies and things that are near and dear to you, sometimes that puts us at ease a little bit too and helps with our nerves. And then you also want to know the answer to, why are you interested in this job? And spoiler alert, the employer is not looking for the answer of because of the pay. That's almost never the answer. So make sure that truthfully, if that's the reason that you're applying for the position, or the sole reason that you're applying for the position, it may not be a good fit for you anyways. And so you want to make sure that that you're applying for that position. Maybe it's because you're passionate about it, or you're passionate about those job responsibilities or job duties, or you love that type of work, or sometimes it's something personal. Like, I know for some individuals that go into healthcare, it's because they had, a loved one that's battled something. And so it's a personal reason for them to go into that. And so I think all of those answers are appropriate, but because of the pay is usually not. And that is all that I had. Do we have any questions on the interview process or any other questions in general?
What about if I have it where they say they're going to pay me so much per hour, and I think I should probably have more? When can I negotiate? Can I do that during the interview?
It depends, because sometimes on the application they'll ask what your expected pay is. And I've seen where some of them will ask what the expected pay is, and then if it's negotiable or not. And I think that some even during the interview process will ask, what are your expectations for salary? And I think it's okay to say that then. Typically, I would wait until a contingency offer is made, and then it's definitely appropriate to negotiate at that point. So, any other questions? No? Okay, well, I appreciate you guys listening, And I am always available to ask questions. I've even done some mock interviews for people, and we can even put together a panel if somebody is interested in that. And so I would be glad to offer my help for that. Oh, question?
Okay. A question I have is that how do I work with, if I have coworkers that I'm having problems with, they're kind of difficult to work with, or my boss is difficult to work with, what is the proper way of handling that?
Okay, so and that's a good question, because when you put a lot of people in the workplace, and you may have 50 people in the workplace and there's 50 different personalities, and so of course you're going to have times where personalities will clash, and it's important that that everybody remains professional and that everybody is respectful of others and civil to others, because even if you don't like somebody, you still have to find a way to work with them. And if there's specific issues that you're having with an individual, then it's appropriate to take it to your leader, or maybe even take some things to human resources, depending on what the leader's response is to that. But I think that we have to find a way to work with the difficult personalities in the workplace and remain professional at all times.
Do you think that there might be, depending upon what generation you come from, there may be assumptions, like, for example, if you're young, that people assume that in the workplace that you're going to be really into technology, super tech savvy, really into social media?
I believe that there are some assumptions, or maybe even stereotypes, because I think that is something prevalent in the workplace, where you think just because they're a millennial or younger that maybe they're really tech savvy, and so if you have computer issues, instead of calling IT, you can call this millennial or younger to come help you with that. I think there is that assumption there, that stereotype, but I think that we have to keep in mind, and there may be some truth to that, and as you get with the younger individuals, because as they've went through school, they've had to use technology, and so they may be a little bit more tech savvy, but I think that we should really steer clear of those stereotypes, because not everybody is tech savvy just because of their age.
I hear people talking about being professional or professional behavior. What does that really mean?
So for me, being professional is being respectful and being civil, and knowing what is expected of you in the workplace, and following workplace policies, and having professional conduct, to me, is doing the right thing and treating others with dignity and respect as well. And so I think as long as we can do that, even when you brought up the question of the difficult coworkers, as long as we can remain professional and keep our conduct professional, I think we can avoid some of those instances.
I've heard the term workplace culture. What does that mean?
So one of the things, when you start a new position, there's always that, it seems like there's this pressure of knowing what the policies are, but you also have to know your environment. You have to know the temperature of the people that you're working with, and what's acceptable there and what's not acceptable there. And so to me, the workplace culture is just that, and knowing the work environment. And sometimes we can have a toxic workplace culture, and that's where maybe morale is low and employees are kind of disgruntled. And so you always want to have a positive work culture, and it takes all of the employees to foster that culture, that environment.
I'm used to having my cell phone with me all the time, turned on, to keep track of family and so forth. Is that something that it could be an issue in the workplace?
It definitely is something that could be an issue in the workplace. I know that we've seen some of that, where the unacceptable use of cell phones, and some organizations will have policies on that, on what the acceptable use is, and maybe that's just during meal times and break times. Or maybe you have an organization that's a little more lax on it, especially if you have an organization where employees are expected to use their cell phones for work, those policies are a little more lax. But there again, it's supposed to be used for business purposes and not for maybe personal usage and scrolling through Facebook or social media or whatnot. And so I would encourage you to find out what your organization's policy is on it, and then find out, once again, it's your work environment or the culture. What is the culture? Is the culture that it's okay to do that? You don't have a policy and the culture's that it's okay, then maybe it's more acceptable. But to err on the side of caution, I would try to only use my cell phone for business purposes and during meal times and break times. All right, so I think that is all that we had for today, and thank you guys for listening to me, and I'm always available at the city if you have questions or comments for me, so thank you.
Thank you, Laura Sanders, for your wonderful presentation. And thank you for tuning in. Our next Life Hacks class will be Tuesday, November 24th. Tara and Seth will share what to do with those Thanksgiving leftovers, and someone from Truity Credit Union will discuss the basics of budgeting. See you then.